Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because it's time for yet another adventure. Today we are talking about Nnedi Okorafor's Nsibidi Scrips series, or at least the first 3 books. I own the first book of this series physically, the other 2 I own on Kindle. This, I believe I was gifted by a friend or family member for a Christmas some time ago. I cannot remember who you are, but thank you so much. The other 2 I've bought myself, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. I am going to need to talk about the first 3 books, however, so if you do want to go into this knowing absolutely nothing, click away now. And I will link the story graph for the series below in case you want to check out any content warnings. This is one of Nnedi Okorafor's series that are written for younger readers. I would say that maybe this book you could read if you were late in middle grade, but definitely by book 3 we're fully into young adult territory. And this series in particular draws on Nnedi Okorafor's Nigerian heritage, with a little bit of American thrown in there as well. We'll come on to it when we talk about the plot. And I will link Nnedi Okorafor's website below in case you want to check out any more about her. In this story, Sunny, a young person with albinism living in Nigeria, having been born in Nigeria, lived in the US, and then come back to Nigeria again with her family, never really felt like she fit in, and she discovers that one of the reasons why is that she is in fact a leopard person, or person with magic. In the first book, Sunny must learn to use these powers without any non-leopard people finding out. But on top of that, there's a serial killer on the loose, and Sunny and her group of friends have to try and deal with it. One of the quotes that's used to describe the series is, certainly at least the first book, is the Nigerian Harry Potter, which I think, on the one hand, I very much get. I think it's not magical school as much, but I think that it's definitely drawing on that idea of a magical world overlaid on, for want of a better word, muggle world, maybe we'd say mundane world. So if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely check this out. I think that Nigerian influence makes it very different from that, and simultaneously the way that the book's set up, I think they get darker much quicker. It's not a direct analogy, but I do think there are a lot of similarities, and I can see why people would pick this up on that basis. I really like the characters in this story. I thought that they were really good fun. It's a really good group of friends, and a lot of really interesting friendships within that, and relationship dynamics that get explored. I also think Sunny's a really great character. She does walk the line of being a bit too main characterish, which I know sounds really silly, but it's one of those things where everything keeps coming back to Sunny and how great Sunny is and all the things that Sunny's doing, which makes sense within the book, but at the same time, I think I wanted it to feel more of an ensemble piece, and it doesn't at times. But you know what? That's a nitpick. It's fine. Who am I to begrudge a main character being a main character, right? I'll also say this is not like anything I've read before, partly because my reading of fantasy, particularly young adult, has not been the most diverse, particularly when I was a teenager. It's definitely got a lot better, but in terms of Nigerian-inspired things, Nnedi Okorafor is one of the writers that I've read the most of that of, so all my reference points are within her other works. I don't want to get too tokenistic and be like, it's so diverse, wow, amazing, learning about these things I've never learned of before, because that's just silly. There is that element of being immersed in a new world and this feeling fresh and new because it's not something we've seen so much of before. Particularly when this first came out, which was 2017? No, 2011. It's getting on a bit now. So down to things like the magic system I really enjoyed. There are multiple different kinds of magic going on. One of them is the reading of Nsibidi, which is a particular script which does in fact exist, and I recommend looking it up because it's really interesting. But the way that Nsibidi is read and the way that Nsibidi works within the story and builds, and the development of that throughout the books is something I really love in a magic system, and I thought it was a really interesting take. So we're at book 3 now. We've had a Kata witch, a Kata warrior, and a Kata woman, and I don't really want to continue on with the series. Now, this is for multiple reasons, most of them personal. So for one thing, I didn't find that this was a series that really stuck with me after I finished the books. I'm finding it hard to talk about because as much as I've got my notes, I don't remember too much about it, and I find that with books I want to reread, it's because I can remember things about them, not because I've forgotten everything about them. Maybe that's just me. So I remember high points of the story and the overall tone of the book, but the actual plot points haven't stuck with me particularly well, to the point where even though I was reading them fairly close together as books, I was finding myself having to really catch myself back up on what was going on, which is not something that's typical for me. I also talked about the overall tone. I think that, particularly by book 3, it wasn't really for me. And I don't mean that in the sense of why wasn't this written for me, but just not something I was enjoying. And I think that if you don't get on with the way that these books are written, I don't know that you'll have the best time with it. And I think some of that's just that there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of stating things, which isn't always my favourite, but I can kind of see how that's how the character is experiencing the world. Your mileage may vary. Having said that, I had a hard time remembering them. I didn't feel like the overarching story and the overarching plot arcs of the books felt particularly unique from one another. While they are very different stories, maybe it's because it wasn't sticking with me as much. And thinking about it, book 3 does have quite a lot going for it that's very different, but I didn't feel like I could, if you gave me like a big book with all of these stuck together, I'd necessarily be able to split it out into 3 parts. And I don't know if that's a pacing issue or what, but it just didn't quite gel with me in the way I wanted it to. Obviously, I think a lot of this is my personal move away from reading as much YA as I used to. I think possibly if I'd read this series 3 or 4 years ago, I would have had a very different opinion, and who's to say if I read it when I was an actual teenager, I would have had a completely different opinion. I can only speak to how I feel about it. If you're an avid fan of this series, that's great, and I expect there are a lot of people for whom this would be just a wonderful, wonderful series. I have to say, just knowing what Nnedi Okorafor has written at other times, this doesn't stand out for me as much. I love Remote Control. I actually really enjoy Binti, which I talked about last week. Like, there are other books that I enjoy more, and I think it's just a sign that I need to focus on Nnedi Okorafor's adult writing. And possibly the other thing, coming on to what I normally end with, which is comparisons, I haven't read a lot of other comparable real world, mundane world, magical world kind of fantasy, and it's not something that I actually gravitate towards, partly because I prefer a just very immersive fantasy world fantasy, and also it's just not something that's crossed my path too much. So yeah, if you have any recommendations of that, please pop them in the comments below, because I am devoid of answers for you if you want similar things to this, other than saying read Remote Control because it's a really, really good novella. So overall, do I think you should read this? If you are into it, if it's something you enjoy, yes. Obviously at one point I really did enjoy this. I read book 1 and I kept hold of it because I knew I wanted to read book 2 and 3, and I was vaguely hoping I would want to read more. But for me personally, this just isn't a series that I'm super keen to finish, and in a world where there is finite time to read books and a finite amount of books I can read before I die, I'm probably going to focus my energies elsewhere. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? Are you a person who, once you've started a series, you really absolutely have to finish it, even if you're not enjoying it anymore? Are you more like me, or where I'm trying to get to, where you can kind of let things go and move on with your life? Maybe I can. I hope I can. You know me and my completionist tendencies. But yes, let me know all of that down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media. Come hang out on Discord. We have chill chats about books. Nothing makes me feel more loved and appreciated than my patrons over on Patreon who support the channel and get early access to videos and exclusive content like my wonderful musings on various different topics. If you'd like to check all of that out, that's linked in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. And he said you can also follow me on social media. That's not what I meant to do. That's not what this time of the video is.